Have you ever just looked at a huge wall of text and been like, whoa there, where do I even begin?
Yeah, all the time. Happens to the best of us.
It can be super overwhelming, right? So today we're diving into readability, like what makes some things easier to read and understand than others.
Sounds useful.
Yeah, we're thinking of this as your guide to just, cutting through all the noise and getting to what you need to know.
Sort of a survival skill for the information age.
Exactly. So you can learn quickly and thoroughly without feeling totally fried.
We'll love it.
And for this deep dive, we're focusing on reconstructing readability, recent developments and recommendations in the analysis of text difficulty by Rebecca George Benjamin. It's a really comprehensive look at how we've been approaching this whole readability thing for the past couple of decades.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like the history of figuring out what makes text hard or easy.
Yeah, and what's really cool is it highlights this major shift. Like we used to rely on these simple formulas, but now it's getting way more sophisticated.
Oh, so like less about just counting words and more about how our brains actually work.
Exactly. Drawing on, cognitive science, even computer science,
Yeah.
like a total evolution in how we figure out what makes a text, readable.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's break this down. First up, those traditional readability formulas. What are they all about?
Well, they focus on the stuff you can easily count. So things like sentence length, word length, how often words pop up.
Right, the surface stuff. So basically shorter sentences and simpler words equal easier reading.
Pretty much. So what are some examples of these formulas and what's new with them, based on the article?
Okay, so one that's got an update is the Newdale-Chow readability formula. Came out back in 95.
Okay.
It's a revision of like a much older formula. And what's interesting is they made this bigger, more up-to-date list of words that most folks know.
Oh, that makes sense. Like keeping up with the times.
Yeah, and they tested it against closed scores, which are those like fill-in-the-blank tests to see how well you get a text.
Right.
The Newdale-Chow spits out a closed score and an estimated grade level.
So like a double whammy of readability assessment.
Right. But even with the update, it still has that same limitation. It doesn't really look at how ideas in the text connect.
So just because you can count the words doesn't mean you understand the flow of information?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then there's the Lexile framework from like the late 80s. Still super popular, especially in school.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely heard of Lexile scores.
It gets a bit more complex. It uses like word frequency
Yeah.
from a massive chunk of text and sentence length. And it does all this on a logarithmic scale, which is just a fancier way of measuring things than a plain old count.
Sounds fancy.
The goal is to match your reading skill, measured by a Lexile score, to a text, which also has a Lexile score.
Sort of like finding your perfect reading match.
Yeah, aiming for about a 75% chance you'll get it. Important note, though, it's a commercial product from a company called Metametrics.
So a business built around helping you find the right reading level. Makes sense.
Yeah, then we've got the Advantage TASA Open Standard for Readability, or ADOS, from 1998.
Okay, ATOS.
This came out of Renaissance Learning and TASA, the folks behind programs like Accelerated Reader, and they tapped into their huge databases of student reading to create formulas for single texts and whole books. The book formula even factors in book length, which is kind of cool.
Makes sense. Like a longer book might feel harder even if the individual sentences are simple.
Right. ADOS looks at word length, sentence length, and the grade level of words. But the article points out that how well ADOS actually predicts reading difficulty. Not a ton of public info on that.
So it's using tons of data, but we don't really know for sure how effective it is.
Yeah, kind of a black box situation. Lastly, there's ReadX, which is still under development.
Okay, ReadX, what's that one about?
It's meant to analyze readability of online text in real time.
Yeah.
Like as you're browsing.
Whoa, that's next level.
The goal is to filter your search results based on your reading level. And eventually, it'll even customize things based on what you already know about a topic using word frequency.
So if I'm already up on the jargon in a certain field, it won't dim me for those longer, more technical words.
Exactly.
That could be a total game changer for online research, especially for students. But with all these traditional formulas, what are the big downsides? The article mentions some, pretty heavy criticisms.
Yeah, the biggest one is that these formulas can basically tell you that nonsense is totally readable if it uses short, common words and sentences. They completely miss if the text actually makes sense.
So you could have a grammatically perfect sentence that's utter gibberish and it'd get a great score.
Yeah, pretty much. And that leads to writing to the formula. Like authors dumbing down their writing just to get a better score, even if it makes the writing less clear or engaging.
Oh, I can totally see that happening, like sacrificing meaning for the sake of simplicity.
Right. But the article also explains why these traditional formulas are so stubborn.
Like why we haven't ditched them yet.
Yeah. They're simple, they're in all the software, and people are just so used to them. So they stick around.
Familiarity, convenience, the classic combo. Okay, so that's the traditional stuff. Now, let's get to the methods inspired by cognitive science. Sounds like we're going deeper into how our brains actually process this stuff.
Absolutely. It's about going beyond counting and actually looking at what's happening in your head when you try to understand something.
Like the mental gymnastics
Yeah,
involved.
exactly. It looks at things like how well the text hangs together, how ideas are connected, stuff like that. And this was influenced by theories about how we learn and remember, how we make mental connections as we read.
So not just decoding words, but actually building meaning.
Exactly.
And the article talks about Walter Kinch. His work seems pretty important here.
Oh, yeah. Super influential. He did a lot of work on proposition density.
Proposition density. Okay, what's that?
It's basically how many key ideas are packed into a piece of writing.
So like how dense the information is.
Exactly. And he had these models of how we understand language that were really foundational. The idea is that when you read, you're breaking sentences down into these little units of meaning called propositions.
Like mini chunks of meaning.
Yeah, and to get the text, you often have to make connections between these propositions, even if they're not directly spelled out. The more you got to connect, the tougher it is mentally.
So a text might seem simple on the surface, but if it's making you do all these mental leaps, it could be way harder than it looks.
Totally. And this is where text cohesion comes in.
Text cohesion, okay.
It's basically the surface level links between sentences.
Like how well they flow together.
Yeah. If those links aren't clear, you got to work harder to bridge the gaps. And for someone new to the topic, that lack of cohesion can make it super tough to follow.
So it's like the text is throwing you curveballs instead of leading you along a path.
A perfect analogy. Now, how do we actually measure these more abstract qualities, like how related words are in meaning? That's where LSA comes in.
LSA, right? Latent semantic analysis. That sounds super techy.
It is. It's a computer-based tool that analyzes how related words or even chunks of text are in meaning. It does this by, representing meanings as points in a semantic space.
Okay, you lost me a little there.
Basically, you train the system on tons and tons of text, and it learns which words tend to hang out in similar contexts. So it goes beyond just seeing if the same words are used. It's looking for deeper meaning connections.
So it's like the computer is building up its own understanding of how words relate to each other.
Yeah, kind of like building its own internal dictionary of meaning.
That's wild. So how can LSA help us figure out readability?
Well, it can compare how similar your writing on a topic is to other texts on that topic. Yeah. The idea being that you might learn better from a text that vibes with what you already know.
Makes sense, like finding reading material that's in your intellectual comfort zone.
Right. LSA can also look at how cohesive a text is by checking how related the sentences are in meaning. A text where ideas flow nicely and are well connected will usually be easier for someone who doesn't know a lot about the topic.
Okay, so it's a tool for both matching you with the right reading material and for analyzing the text itself.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get to those empirical studies the article talks about. How have these ideas about readability been tested in the real world?
Right. There's some really interesting studies. One looked at revising texts based on Kinch's model of comprehension.
Okay, so taking his ideas and actually putting them into practice.
Yeah. Basically, they made the connections between ideas more obvious, help the reader connect the dots.
Like adding in those missing links.
Exactly. And they found that this improved how well newbies understood and remembered the text, even when those traditional readability scores didn't change.
That's so cool. Proof that there's more to readability than just counting words.
Right. Shows that focusing on meaning and connections really matters. Another key finding came from studies that looked at how text cohesion interacts with what you already know about a topic.
Okay, so like how your background knowledge influences how easy something is to read.
Exactly. They found that if you're new to a topic, you do better with highly cohesive texts, where those connections are super clear. But if you're already a bit of an expert, you actually benefit from texts with less cohesion because it pushes you to think harder.
So what's easy is relative to what you already have up here.
Right. No one-size-fits-all answer.
Fascinating. The article also mentions software called Cometrics. What's that all about?
Cometrics is a pretty powerful tool that can analyze over 50 different things about language, including cohesion and overall text difficulty. It uses LSA too. One study they mentioned predicted that if students were matched with text based on how semantically similar they were to the student's own writing, they'd learn way better.
Wow, so personalized reading recommendations based on your own writing style? That's pretty amazing.
Right. But it's worth noting that some research has compared co-metrics to traditional readability formulas. And sometimes those old formulas are still pretty good at predicting things like, how well you can fill in missing words.
So those old school methods might not be totally dead in the water just yet.
They still have their uses, it seems. The article also discusses research that uses the idea of semantic networks, like
hmm
WordNet, which is based on how we categorize things.
Okay, semantic networks, WordNet. I'm following.
So the idea is that text difficulty is linked to the kinds of words used, especially the balance between basic, everyday words and more complex ones.
So like how much jargon or technical language is thrown in there?
Yeah. One study actually found that the proportion of basic level nouns in online reading materials matched up with grade levels better than traditional formulas did. But there's a catch. They were looking at online texts that already had grade levels assigned, and we don't always know how those were determined in the first place.
Right, so there might be some circular logic going on there.
Could be. Then there's Delete, which was developed in Germany.
Delight, another piece of software.
Yep. This one tries to combine both the surface stuff and those deeper aspects of sentences and meaning.
Yeah.
And get this, they trained it on how actual humans rated readability.
So it's learned from the pros.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Interestingly, even with all the fancy stuff it looks at, sentence length still turned out to be super important in its analysis.
So those old school measures still have some clout.
Seems like it. While Delete was better at matching human judgments than a basic formula like Flesch-Kincaid, it still couldn't explain all the variations in readability, and it hasn't really been compared to some of the newer traditional measures.
So more research needed. Okay, so it sounds like these cognitive science methods give us a way richer understanding of readability, but they're still being, fine-tuned.
Yeah, and they don't always beat those simpler methods in every situation.
Yeah, right. Okay, now for the third category, statistical language modeling. This is where computer science enters the picture.
This is where it gets really interesting. Okay, lay it on me.
So statistical language models, or SLMs, work by looking at how likely certain words or combos of words will show up in texts written for different grade levels.
So it's like the computer is learning the language patterns of each grade level.
Exactly. They're not analyzing meaning or sentence structure, just the statistical probability of words appearing together at a particular reading level.
So like the word cat is way more likely to be in a first grade book than a college textbook.
Perfect example. You feed it a ton of texts that already have grade levels, and it figures out how likely words and phrases are to appear at each level. Then you give it a new text, and it tries to guess which grade level style it matches best.
So it's like a pattern matching machine.
Exactly.
And where do support vector machines or SVMs fit in?
So SVMs are these powerful algorithms that can use all sorts of info, not just the stats from SLNs, but also traditional features like sentence length and even fancier stuff about grammar. And they learn from that training data, just like the SLMs, to build models that classify texts by grade level. So it's like they're bringing all these different pieces of the puzzle together.
Yep, combining them for a more accurate prediction of text difficulty. The article then goes into some key studies using these statistical methods. One early study from 2001 looked at web pages and found that SLMs, especially when paired with sentence length, were way better at predicting grade level than a traditional formula like Flesch-Kincaid. And that's huge because those old formulas often don't work so well with all the different kinds of writing you see online.
Makes sense given how diverse and, let's face it, sometimes chaotic the internet is.
Exactly. Other studies expanded on this with bigger sets of text, more detailed grade levels, and even added in grammar info. Just using grammar alone didn't always help, but when you combine it with other stuff, like in those SVMs,
Yeah.
they did a much better job, especially for more traditional educational materials.
So a good mix of old and new approaches.
It seems like it.
The article also mentioned using internet search engines in this way.
Oh yeah, that study was really cool. They looked at using SVMs to analyze your search terms and try to figure out your reading level, then tailor the search results to you.
So like a search engine that knows you're a fifth grader and gives you fifth grade friendly results.
Yep. Of course, search engines have come a long way since that study in 2004, but it highlighted the potential for personalizing online information to your reading abilities.
Which would be incredibly valuable, especially for students.
Absolutely.
Okay, so big takeaway from this section. Statistical language modeling and machine learning offer some really powerful new ways to figure out text difficulty, especially for online stuff, but they really rely on having good training data.
That's super important. They don't magically decide how difficult a text is. They learn from examples.
Mm.
But once they're trained, they can categorize a ton of text really quickly.
So they're like super efficient assistants, but they need good teachers.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, we've covered traditional methods, the cognitive science approaches, and statistical language modeling. Now, the article gives some recommendations for using all this in education. So, for educators and researchers trying to assess text difficulty, what are the practical takeaways?
Well, the article breaks it down by reader groups:
Hmm.
adults, school kids, and those just learning to read. For adults, it suggests that those old formulas, like the Newdale-Chall, Lexile, and Atos, are still pretty good for general stuff like books and articles. But for more complex informational texts or for getting a sense of writing quality, how well ideas connect a tool like Cometrics with those cognitive science measures can be super helpful. It can even pinpoint where writing could be improved.
So, those familiar formulas are still fine for everyday reading, but for digging deeper, we need those newer tools.
Exactly. Now, for school children, especially grades 4-12, those same three, Newdale-Chow, Lexile, and Atos, are recommended because they were made for that age range and they've been studied a lot. The article also mentions that for textbooks and specific subjects, using qualitative scales can be helpful. That's where teachers assess things a formula might miss.
So, adding in the human touch, that teacher expertise.
Right. And it's interesting that Atos research found that nonfiction tends to be a bit tougher than fiction for those grades, something to keep in mind when choosing books for kids.
Oh, for sure. What about those advanced statistical methods for school kids? Are they ready for prime time?
Not quite yet.
Yeah.
The article says they're promising for analyzing online stuff for that age, but they're still mostly in the research phase.
Some more work to do before they hit the classroom.
Yep.
And finally, those brand new readers, the little ones just starting out, what's the best way to assess text difficulty for them?
This is where those formulas might not be the most helpful. Factors like how consistent the letter-sound relationships are, how many words are on a page, the pictures, the print size, all that stuff becomes really important.
So it's a lot more nuanced than just word count and sentence length.
Exactly. For this age group, those qualitative methods, where experienced teachers are making the judgment calls, are usually better. While a recent study found that Lexiles were decent at telling apart early reading texts, they weren't always sensitive enough.
So the expert eye of a teacher is still key for those little readers.
Absolutely.
Okay, wrapping things up, the article really drives home this evolution in how we think about readability, from basic formulas to much more complex cognitive and machine learning stuff.
It's been a long journey.
And while those old formulas still have their place, especially for getting a general sense of difficulty, these newer methods offer so much more insight into what makes a text hard for different people and in different situations.
And they have the potential to really change how we learn and access information.
Absolutely. And it sounds like the future is going to bring even more user-friendly automated tools that combine all these approaches.
I can't wait to see what they come up with.
Me too. It's pretty exciting to think about.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our final thought for you, our listener. Imagine how all this progress might not just change how we judge texts, but how texts are made and tailored to each person's learning style in the future. Like, what happens in a world where information is personalized to your needs? It's a lot to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.